This week's episode was brought to you by David Gutierrez, Jasmine, Tristan Andrews, Mercedes Ryan, and Olivia. Thank you, David Gutierrez, Jasmine, Tristan Andrews, Mercedes Ryan, and Olivia. It's with the generous support of listeners just like you that keeps our wooden shack full of miniaturized cold fusion nuclear reactors topped up with thermal diffusion gel and generating enough radiation to keep the small team of gray aliens that write this show in a state of deep suggestive hypnosis, where they articulate the secrets of the universe against their will. If you'd like to help keep our team of gray aliens held hostage, or just hear the second half of this episode, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you the second half of this episode, but the second half of our entire library of strange and esoteric content. But that's not all. Subscribe now, and we'll send you a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny cover art and immediate access to our Discord server, where Crisscross will make you jump. If you enjoy the free show, but like wearing your clothes the correct way forward, please consider giving us a like, subscribe, or share on your social media platform of choice. On this week's episode, we journey down the Rio Putumayo to catch a glimpse at the cosmic other being channeled into our time stream by the mighty master of mushroom munching, Terence McKenna, and his brother Dennis. Join us as we tease out the delirious details of McKenna's TimeWave Zero theory, his UFO sightings, globe-trotting adventures smuggling drugs, and his wise words on the psychedelic nature of life and the soul. In the extended episode, we take a deep dive into Terence McKenna's food of the gods to meet ancient mushroom cults, thick-skulled Neanderthals, and a very horny goddess. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The descriptions for the mushrooms in Vancouver were really accurate. Like, it said it will make you a little sleepy. It made us a little sleepy.
I like the weed descriptions though, because it reminds me of going to like a pretentious wine bar or like a wine cellar, and they're like, it has a floral, a woody aroma on the uptake. They have all these like a mouthfeel and like weird terms to describe the wine. And I'm like, I don't care. It's just wine.
To be fair, the in-depth descriptions of the flavors of weed are much more helpful for me than the psychological placebo of how it's supposed to give me a certain type of high. I've never found those to be helpful.
I do, because I know if it's pure indica, I won't like it.
It makes Trevor see clowns.
It makes me not be able to get up off a couch and have panic attacks.
Into couch.
Like at one point there was a fan on me and it felt like my skin was on fire even though I was really cold.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's awful.
Ah, my skin's on fire! You want a hit? It'll make your skin on fire. Hello everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we do more than just tell you the world's gonna end in 2012 because of mathematical patterns in the I Ching, leaving you high and dry with a head full of psilocybin mushrooms, 2 roaches, a bad explanation of the mind calendar, and a dusty old copy of Be Here Now with veiled threats of looming alien invasion. Nay, we follow Terence McKenna to Jerusalem, Vancouver, the Amazon, Tokyo, Timor, and everywhere in between to take an extended study of the blossoming lily pads of fungus flowering from the chrysanthemum at the center of the cosmic giggle, showering us in the rainbow of transcendental otherness, because this week we're discussing the man, the mystery, and the mushroom-loving madman, Terence McKenna. I'm your host, Hack Rabbit, also known as Luke Madrid. I'm joined by this week's co-hosts, the amazing mycelial mammal mashup, Mari Sama.
Mama loves her mushrooms.
The shroom seer of Satan, Malachor 5.
Supersonic salutations.
And the foxy gnome thief of the north, Heka Astra.
Hello. You're never too old to steal the gnome.
Noise.
Gnomes are like mushroom people.
Yep.
They seem like cool entities that might just start building shit in front of you out of nowhere and then break it down before the trip is over.
They're apparently like fairy folk that live inside of mushrooms, like the Smurfs.
So if somebody were to ask me, Luke, who radicalized you? Who put all those wacky ideas in your head first? It might be tempting to say Robert Anton Wilson. The truth is I only discovered Mr. Anton Wilson when I required so much help digging myself out of all the unrestrained bedlam Terence McKenna had psyched me into unleashing. As fate would have it, I had become another particle in McKenna's TimeWave Zero, undulating with the inexorable flow towards the end of time when all the UFOs would arrive en masse to reveal the cosmic secret to humanity, the newest member of the galactic family. But when December 22nd, 2012 finally came, our day jobs still existed. Decades of hippie hype collided unsatisfyingly with a whimper against the cold rocks of mundane existence. And unfortunately, life went on. And while David Wilcock and Laura Eisenhower continued to lecture about the blue avians and Luciferian G-men to conference halls bigger than ever, the New Age movement never fully recovered. Even still, magic mushrooms continued to become decriminalized in more and more places every year, and even if the world didn't end because of some esoteric pattern in the I Ching, it's worth taking a trip back to memory lane to both review the psychedelic ideas of Terence McKenna and follow up on the controversial accusations that he may have been a spy.
Dun, dun, dun!
I mean, I guess it should be like a disclaimer here is that some of the things we're going to mention on him being a spy or not are not proven, but there's some interesting, coincidences in his career that kind of point us in the direction to believe it might be true.
Well, technically his theories are not proven and the theories revolving around him are unproven.
That's also true.
But he did give us a lot of mushrooms.
That he
And-
did.
So for someone like me that took a lot of his ideas unquestioningly and built them into his own perspective of the universe, it's fun to go back and pick out things in 2020 hindsight and discuss them in the light of the present. So while Terrence, if nothing else, was a diplomat for the now infamous machine elves in DMT land, the alien mushroom, and as he put it, the transcendental other, this was, after all, the true purpose of visiting the foreign lands of the psychedelic and inner landscapes.
Yeah, before doing this episode, I didn't really have any bad ideas about Terrence, like that I think he's a spy or anything is a new emerging theory in my head, but that still doesn't change ultimately what he did for the modern age, I guess. And he has like tons of talks online on YouTube you can find, and in one of them, he has a really interesting like section at the end of one of his speeches on his theory of TimeWave Zero. But to cut to the chase, it's what Terrence believes the psychedelic experience is for. And it sounds a lot like some stuff that David Lynch says when he comments on transcendental meditation. So he says, "We each must become like fishermen and go out onto the dark ocean of mind and let your nets down into that sea. What you're after is not some behemoth that will tear through your nets, foul them, and drag you and your little boat into the abyss, nor are we looking for a bunch of sardines that can slip through your nets and disappear." Ideas like, have you ever noticed how your little finger exactly fits your nostril? Stuff like that. What we are looking for are middle-sized ideas that we can wrestle into our boat, take back to the folks on shore, and have fish dinner. And every one of us, when we go into the psychedelic state, this is what we should be looking for. It's not for your own elicitation, not part of your self-directed psychotherapy. You're an explorer, and you represent our species. The greatest good you can do is to bring back a new idea, because our world is in danger by the absence of good ideas. Our world is in crisis because of the absence of consciousness. And so to whatever degree, any one of us can bring back a small piece of the picture and contribute it to the redemption of the human spirit. That, after all, is what it's all about.
So he is a spy for the state, the psychedelic state.
Oh.
And in past episodes, I've mentioned about how, drugs are good for, making art and all that stuff. This is essentially what you're doing when you're bringing back a good idea, right? Oh, I got a good idea for a song, and then you're able to easily execute it and manifest it. Or if it's a book or any sort of art media, whatever.
Yeah, like Stephen King doesn't remember writing Cujo. Too high on cocaine. Same thing with David Bowie and Station to Station. But we get to enjoy Cujo. We get to enjoy Station to Station. That was a good use of drugs. Not mushrooms, but hey, good use of drugs.
Right. And I even said that, I feel that novelty, that fresh new ideas come out of these bad ideas that are wrong on purpose. So Terrence is saying, when you're doing this the right way, you're going to get good ideas. And then I'm saying a little bit of the opposite of that, but it turns out artistically, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, because if you're able to execute it, then it exists and it validates itself. But I really like that quote, because it's like saying you have to go back to some sort of water element abyss to start fishing for stuff.
Yeah, and even if you lose all your bait and you only have one fishing pole left and you'd have no food or water and you're basically a castaway, you still have to try to reel in that fish. You still get something out of the experience, even if you have, say, a bad trip. If stuff goes wrong, you'll still come out of it. And hopefully, if you do it right, you'll have something to bring back into the present that will help you. or other people.
I like this quote. It's like, good ideas are the edible fish that you bring back and share. And maybe bad ideas are the inedible fish, but I kind of like to think of it like, well, even inedible fish have uses.
Right.
We've done entire episodes about this exact symbolism in the tarot between the constellation of Pisces in the moon card and Aries in the Emperor card, between the fish and the fish hook. It's symbolic of this ability to bring something back from the undifferentiated consciousness of the other.
And I do have my own boat analogy, and I like to say, the boat on the water is like normal consciousness. And as you plunge down into the depths, like that's where all the shiny treasure from the ancients might be. And you can see it in the darkness easier when you're the light source. It shines, right? But like the goal is you have to get that up to the surface and back to your boat anyway.
Never get off the boat. Terrance McKenna was born in the small town of Paonia, Colorado, where childhood pastimes included the prodigious hunting and collecting of fossils with his brother Dennis. This relationship to his brother, as friend and research partner, would endure his whole life and would see Dennis participate in many of his later adventures with psychedelics. In a 1993 article of Details magazine, Terrance once said, "I think my first encounter with psychedelics was looking at Colorado and trying to understand that it was once the shores of an ancient ocean with 100-foot-long sauropods tromping through the mangrove swamps." By the age of 14, Terrance's curiosity about the world around him would blossom into one about the inner landscape of the mind, having discovered both Carl Jung's psychology and alchemy, as well as Robert R. Wasson's article Seeking the Magic Mushroom, which was published in Life magazine in May of 1957. Robert Wasson was the person who coined the term psychedelic, which translates to soul manifesting, and it helped replace the unsavory terminology psychomimetic, which less romantically means psychosis mimicking. His article, Seeking the Magic Mushroom, introduced not just Terence McKenna to the idea of magic mushrooms, but tens of millions of regular readers. This was followed up just a week later by his wife's first-person account of their journey in This Week, a popular weekly magazine. These articles detailed the couple's journey to becoming one of the first Westerners to participate in a mushroom ritual sacred to the Mazatec people of Oaxaca, Mexico, who they came into contact with through a curandera named Sabina. Armed with foreknowledge that the Mazatec mushroom ceremony was employed sometimes to discover missing objects, Robert asked for help locating his son, whom he falsely claimed had gone missing. After the ceremony, Wasson asked Sabina if he could take a photo of her, which she agreed to on the condition that it be kept totally private. Wasson then published it along with her name and the community she belonged to, which was consequently nearly destroyed by tourists in its wake, nearly forcing the Mazatec to abandon their long-held traditions.
What a move.
What a dick.
Sabina was ostracized by her community, which burned her house down, jailed her briefly, and saw her die shortly after in destitute poverty, mourning her ill-fated decision to trust Robert R. Wasson.
Whoa.
According to official documents obtained by John Marks through the Freedom of Information Act, this excursion was actually funded by the CIA's MKULTRA program, Subproject 58, with Wasson mentioned as an unwitting participant.
Whoa. Whoa, that just blew my mind.
So the MKUltra program by the CIA funded the expedition to find this magic mushroom, and then this dude published it and got everyone interested in it, including Mr. McKenna.
Oh my God.
Well, they were trying to figure out a way to basically use psychic visions to spy on Russia and stuff,
or to defend ourselves from their potential use of psychic spies. Yeah.
Well, that's what we know, though, right?
Well, that was the reasoning that was given that for all of the psychedelic research that they did, but it makes sense that they'd get a patsy to go out and hunt for the mushroom itself, without sending people into the field, right?
Well, they often have multiple motivations, too, for doing something.
The only reason why they stopped was because it wasn't technically military grade results. It wasn't 99%.
It was significant, but not precise.
Yeah, some individuals were more adept than others, but that was not doable.
Doing the screenings to find these gifted individuals cost way more than it did to just send a drone to bomb somebody.
Yeah, so they were like, this is just dumb, so they stopped doing it.
They eventually figured out that psilocybin mushrooms don't have very measurable dose-dependent effects like DMT does, or,
They found out all kinds of cool stuff like that.
So when Terrance turned 16, he moved to Los Altos, California with some family friends, but finished high school at Lancaster. Having smoked marijuana since his teens, Terrance was turned onto psychedelic literature by Aldous Huxley, who is a contemporary of R. Robert Wasson. In some ways, it seems Terence McKenna was the target audience for countercultural figureheads like Timothy Leary, Wasson, and Huxley, who helped ignite the psychedelic fervor of the 1960s. In 1965, Terence McKenna enrolled at the University of Berkeley, California, which, all things considered, was maybe one of the best times and places to be a young person ever. Terence was accepted into a special wing of UC Berkeley called Tustman's University, which was an experimental school which, according to Wikipedia, focused on big problems in cultural crisis periods in history, which had driven great thinkers to tackle fundamental questions. Emphasis was given to primary sources, and grades were not given.
Yeah, that's
That-
really unusual.
So I guess I would say something here about like the theory that this guy might have been like a spy. I think it's totally within like the sphere that like special forces, military do you go to universities and campuses to recruit potential, valuable,
Yeah.
soldiers, I guess.
It could be a vetting program that he entered for sure.
Yeah. This is one of the like this is screaming
Like
this
where
to
they
me.
pick people out, but who's to know if he got picked for real?
So it was here, in the center of this utopian hippie storm of the stinky and unshaven, that Terence began to study Tibetan shamanism before setting off to Jerusalem in 67 to smoke opium and study Kabbalah, where he met his future wife, ethnobotanist Kathleen Harrison.
That sounds like a fun trip.
Hell yeah.
All right, everybody, I'm going to Jerusalem to stare at the Tree of Life and smoke dope. Goodbye, I'll see you in a few years. In 1969, Terence moved to Nepal to seek out Bon shamans willing to satisfy his curiosity about their use of visionary plants and ritual. It was during this time in Nepal, Terence also studied the Tibetan language and worked as a hashish smuggler until one of his packages, back in Colorado, was intercepted by U.S. Customs in the August of 69, leading Terence to wander Indonesia looking at ruins under the guise of being a professional butterfly collector.
Tripped out bug catcher wants to battle.
Yeah, like a Pokemon master. Machine elves, I choose you.
Putting up his glasses while he says it.
Oh, and they flash in the light. Oh, yeah.
It sounds like he pretty much just went wherever he could get marijuana and smoke it every day. That was a big part of where he went, it seems like.
Air day.
I thought this was particularly interesting. Following his time laying low catching butterflies in Indonesia, Terence would be, quote, drawn through Hong Kong over to Taiwan, Timor, a bunch of other countries, and eventually Tokyo, where he taught English to Japanese students before escaping to Canada, where he spent time in Victoria and Vancouver, both in British Columbia. So while this guy was escaping the feds, he went everywhere. And apparently he speaks Japanese well enough to teach English over in Japan. It was during this time in Vancouver, sadly, that his mother died. All the while, Terence and his adventure party of friends, fellow academics and psychonauts, had stayed in constant correspondence with his brother Dennis back in Colorado, who had been preparing to disembark to the Amazonian jungles of Colombia along with them. Their ultimate destination? The remote village of La Chorrera, where they would seek the orally active form of DMT they had long dreamed to experiment with, a substance called ukuhe. For years, Terence had been able to synthesize DMT in the lab, and presumably smoke it out of a crack pipe like hippies still enjoy today. But even though at the time this was an incredibly cool resource, it was unsatisfying in its short duration of 10 to 15 minutes, which Terence claimed to not be able to really do enough in that amount of time to have the full psychonaut experience he really wanted. For years, the crew had pined to disembark on this grail quest for the holy psychedelic, and the time finally arrived in February of 1971. They first arrived in Sao Paulo, where they then worked towards the Rio Putumayo River, which would take them to La Chorrera, where a short distance away lived the indigenous Watoto people. It was their hopes that the Watoto people would bless them with this sacred Okuhi potion. However, the Watoto people were suspicious of outsiders, and were just then recovering from a lethal battle between rival shamans, which had resulted in the death of 3 people.
Whoa, shaman battle.
The fight had been initiated by one shaman placing a magical paralytic atop of a ladder of the other shaman who, once touching it, fell and broke his neck.
Oh.
Because the crew wanted to avoid causing a stir amongst the Watoto, they decided to play it safe in the tiny village of La Chorrera, where a particularly potent strain of psilocybin mushrooms were growing on the vast amounts of dung from the sabu cattle grazing there. Now, this was not something they had at Berkeley. It wasn't what they were looking for, but it was also something that they didn't have access to back in California, so they wanted to eat some of it.
Well, they were also super hungry, by the way.
Yeah, supposedly they didn't have much money, so they would eat the mushrooms along with anything else they could get. Now, frustrated with the delays of finding akuhe, they found themselves diving deeper and deeper into the endless supply of psilocybin mushrooms, which they eventually would rationalize because of its close chemical relationship to DMT was accidentally but fortuitously the orally active psychedelic they were seeking. The two chemicals are related if you listen to them talk enough.
Yeah, one of DMT is like flipped from psilocybin.
They're pretty close. On high enough doses, the pair of brothers could hear what sounded like a distant resonance, which, as they imitated with their voice, would amplify and bring them closer to its source, which they presumed to be a transcendental world of infinite information and divine creativity. Dennis explains the experience thusly.
In those sessions, it quickly became clear that the mushrooms were the source of the real gnosis, and our quest for Okuhe became all but forgotten as the mushrooms began to download a lot of what seemed like gnosis to us. In particular, some extremely peculiar, funny ideas, as my brother put it, about biophysics, insect metamorphosis, the nature of time, and suggestions about an experiment we could perform that would not only change us, but might be the key to opening up another dimension.
Dun dun dun! Some Aleister Crowley
So we performed this experiment. Really more of a ritual than an experiment in a scientific sense, and it had spectacular results, but not the result we had predicted. Not the collapse of space-time continuum, but a profound and prolonged psychological transformation, which must have looked like psychosis to the casual observer, but to us, Terrence and me, made perfect sense in the context of what was happening to us. Years later, when I think about what happened, it seems to me that it fits the model of shamanic initiation more than it does a prolonged, simultaneous psychosis. All the themes were there. The notion of a cosmic journey, of transformation into something not human or more than human, and the acquisition of shamanic powers, such as telepathy, the ability to heal, knowledge of plants, access to vast archives of archetypical information.
Yeah, this is an interesting note. I thought Dennis points out is that the real holy grail for them turned out to be the mushrooms instead of the DMT. And though they had synthesized DMT in the lab and smoked it, and had also taken LSD, the experience was clean and sterile like a dream. But they found with the mushrooms, including being on them for so long, they were now hearing a clear voice or these audio hallucinations, and they were seeing visions that seemed to be the communications of a higher intelligence. That numbing drone of the sound they were experiencing on the psychedelics was thought to be the voice of the world or universe that shamans and mystics had been tapping into since the dawn of mankind in order to commune with nature and to bring back important wisdom to other humans or their tribe.
I totally agree. Sometimes when you're tripping, you get a ringing in your ears, especially if you're trying to sleep.
Have you guys heard the hum, the kind of hum-ish ring?
of the UFOs.
No,
Well, that
like
might be the sound.
when you're high on mushrooms.
Yeah, it was more in the background for me because I didn't take a high dose.
I never heard it around other people, but I have heard it when I've been by myself on mushrooms.
Mine was more when I was outside.
Yeah, I can't stay inside if I'm on mushrooms.
Yeah, I kind of tend to do that.
Well, I think this warrants an experiment.
Didn't they try to match the hum with their own voice as a group?
Yeah, and it creates this harmonic vibration, I guess. And then I noticed that in like Hindu circles and even in some Buddhism, you're supposed to hum when you're meditating. Mm-hmm. Also, if you play the tone in your ears and then hum to it, it's multiplicative. It gets really, really super loud.
This might be kind of weird, but with my industrial sewing machine, it has like a really intense hum sometimes. And in order to not be agitated by it, sometimes I just match it and hum with it. It feels like I sew better. We're like working together now.
You're tapping into the spirit of your sewing machine.
The frequency.
Mine sounds like...
That's
That's
cool.
what it turns into when you slow it down.
That's why didgeridoos are awesome for trance.
Dennis had mixed a concoction of harmine, a natural MIO inhibitor, which acted synergistically with the high dose of psilocybin mushrooms and caused him to enter into a prolonged altered state in which he had to slowly rebuild his own sanity back before leaving the jungle. Of this occurrence, Terrence believed they had contacted the source of the Logos itself, the source of all religious revelation.
He kind of toyed with the idea of the sound also being a holographic echo, like a standing wave of information that can come through your senses when all of your perceptive filters are removed by a psychedelic drug or meditation at the highest levels. Only at that point we are both sensitive enough and have the right amount of time to perceive the message. Though the McKenna brothers thought mushrooms seemed to have a unique intelligence about them, other psychedelics have this intelligent quality as well. People report experiences with the goddess, elves, jesters, and other childlike entities on DMT, both oral and inhaled versions. Time seems to be the difference. Perhaps the tones they were hearing buzzing in their heads for extended amounts of time allowed a different experience. Terrance at one point linked these hallucinations as shockwaves from the future, being experienced through the altered state. Maybe they were hearing the heartbeat of the neuron firing in a being that contains the whole universe, past, present, and future simultaneously.
That's cool.
Yeah, you might be hearing something from beyond our own dimension. We are stuck in the now, and there's also the past, and the future is yet determined, but we might be involved in a system that's outside of what we're experiencing in everyday life.
It's like somebody has a loop pedal on the audio file. And it's repeat. It might be the repeated loop of what was already playing.
Say an asteroid hits the Earth next year. If you were tripping right now, you might feel that echo of what happened.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think that's what he was talking about.
It is
disturbance in the force. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was during this time that Terence had begun to form the germinal inklings of his TimeWave Zero theory, which suggested an invisible structure to time, which initiated the rise and fall of empires as it did the creation of great literary classics. At one point, Terence even beheld a distant cloud slowly morph into a nuts and bolts UFO, which passed close enough overhead to be identified visually as one just like the famous George Adamski photograph, which Terence, with reserved amusement, admits was widely held to be a hoax and nothing more than the end cap of a Hoover vacuum cleaner. Now, I too have a story about mushroom UFOs, but I think Mari also has a mushroom experience. Let's start with hers.
Yeah, well, I didn't take 5 grams in a dark place by myself.
Oh.
So let's get that out the gate.
Is that the McKenna method?
Yes.
Yeah. That's how you break through, basically. I'm too anxiety prone for that. So I took 3 grams and I put it in a smoothie with a bunch of fruits. And I had that and I drank it and put it on my altar and drank it. And I had like kind of a ritual thing going. Once it kicked in, I had a feeling that I was like drunk on the earth, like the ground and dirt and the rocks and trees and stuff. And I was compelled to stand in the backyard barefoot, staring up at the tree's canopy of leaves. I could feel an energy moving between me and the ground, like the roots of a plant pulling water up and also the leaves pulling the sun's energy into them. I was able to perceive fountains of energy flowing from my thoughts and intentions, arcing out of my body, clumping at my chest and kind of arcing up through my crown, kind of out of my body, but also like from my head. And every time I thought about something, or every time I directed my attention towards something, I could see this like flow of energy. My visual pattern seeking was totally heightened. I had to stare at blank walls to see geometry, but everything else looked like it was kind of wiggly, like jello. I usually do see patterns and stuff normally, so
lucky.
Colors were more vivid, kind of like LSD, but not as pronounced. I was more interested in the details and the nitty gritty stuff. I also had the audio hallucinations, like the faint humming, which I could only hear when I was, like Hecka said, quiet and alone and outside. And when I was inside the house and people were talking or we were watching something on the TV, I felt like I was underwater. You know, when you go underwater and you're hearing something like a music playing, it's all like muffled and stuff. Like it feels like I had earmuffs on.
Do you have it when you're on mushrooms where your eyes water and it feels like you're not just crying mushroom tears, it's like mushroom goop?
Oh,
like
that's cool.
I get that like every time I do mushrooms, I get mushroom tears and it's like they're not regular tears. They feel like
You know what they call that?
lifeblood.
You know what they call that? Ectoplasm.
I also often get that same when you were describing having the feeling of roots like a plant. I get that quite a bit with mushrooms too, where if I sit somewhere or I stand somewhere for any length of time, it feels like I have roots extend out of me and into the earth.
Yeah.
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 Into couch, into couch, into couch.
Even branches grow up into the, sky.
It's cool, like, if you go to move and you can, like, feel the roots retract into yourself.
So one time, after listening to a bunch of Terence McKenna, I got the idea that I could chop up a bunch of psilocybin mushrooms, put them in some honey, and leave them in a dark room for 2 months. I did this, and I mixed it into some tea, drank it. My friend forced me to watch the Tim and Eric show. I was very confused. And more or less, the mushrooms didn't kick in. And I thought it was a failure. So I'm sitting there listening to some music, and I suddenly start to see little amoebas in my glass of water start rapping to the music. I'm like, whoa, dude, this little amoeba's rapping in my glass of water. So I go up closer to look at the little amoebas that are rapping, and they slowly begin to change into the stars in a vast galaxy. And I can see this whole galaxy in this glass of water. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And then out of the clouds of the galaxy come this inter-shifting, morphing, metallic cloud of geometry that is very clearly a UFO coming out and manifesting itself. And I'm like, what the hell? I look around, there's no geometry on the walls, nothing looks trippy, it is just happening in my glass of water. That's the only UFO I've ever seen. So I've got some empathy for Terrence seeing a Hoover vacuum cleaner fly over his head, you know? The mushrooms do what they want.
That's crazy.
I think you have a hard time having visual hallucinations, though, right?
I do. It's not easy for me.
It's everyday life for me.
I get visuals very quickly with hallucinogenics.
The ladies on this show are just permanently tripping.
No, my basal state, as I look at stuff and I'll see patterns in it, like faces and stuff, and it'll keep changing. Like, I don't know.
I rest my case.
I recently taught myself how to hallucinate on command.
I mean, you've got to trance out, but it happens.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's also not as intense as, like, you know, mushrooms or LSD.
Oh,
but
no.
It is possible.
So feeling their work had concluded, the crew disembarked back to Berkeley, California in April of 1971, where Terrance McKenna had a poor time of selling his fledgling TimeWave Zero theories to proper academics. One of these experiences is described in detail in his book, True Hallucinations. Austere and balding, he settled back into his chair while I launched into ideas behind the experiment at La Chorrera. I tried to begin gently, but I was overwrought and very nervous. After a few minutes, I sensed that he might be calculating the odds of whether I would physically attack him. To his credit, he seemed to fight back his alarmed swarm of thoughts, allowing me to ramble on and on. His face became utterly impassive as I became more and more uncertain of the direction in which the conversation was headed. Finally, after a particularly long and outlandish burst of speculation through which he had remained utterly unreadable, I decided to try and bring the matter to a head. Dr. Stent, my concern in coming here to discuss this with you is simply that I would like to know whether this theory has any validity or is simply fallacious. He seemed to soften slightly, and left his position behind the desk to join me in looking westward through the thick-tinted glass. With a sigh of resignation that was heart-sinking to his visitor, he turned to me and spoke. My dear young friend, these ideas are not even fallacious. My chagrin was bottomless, and I fled dizzy with embarrassment. So much for my bridge-building efforts towards normal science. Encounters such as that convinced me I had to relearn epistemology, genetics, philosophy, and science. The entire gamut of subjects necessary to discuss the areas for which I had such a compelling concern. My study of the I Ching, or Book of Change, advanced. I had refined the idea that its structure was the basis of a time wave, or waves. These waves are discrete periods of change that follow each other as well as enclose each other. I came to realize that the internal logic of the time wave strongly implied a termination of normal time and an end of ordinary history. At that point, the idea of concrescent psychomatter and the UFO that I had encountered at La Chorrera became identified in my mind with each other and with the end of time scenarios of the Western religious traditions. Nerd alert! With his friends fearing for his mental state and rumors that the FBI had caught wind of his reappearance in the United States, Terence McKenna and his now girlfriend Evie began preparing a return trip to La Chorrera. In Colombia, the pair had purchased some emeralds which they had resold in the States for enough money to fund their second trip. By July 1971, they would be back on the Rio Putumayo, which Terence mused had etymological roots to a phrase like whore of illusion. It was there, in La Chorrera, between long walks along the jungle paths around the town, and hours spent poring over graphs of paper that Terence began developing his ideas about the structure of time. One observation Terence noticed was that his own life seemed to be governed by 64-day-long cycles, which reminded him of the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which he still believed to be hiding the secret of it all.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of mystical systems rely on math and logical relationships in order to peer into into the time of the now, whether it to be to see the future or reconcile the past. Terrance admitted that there are other systems that seem to fall into this or similar patterns that also work very well, but he also preferred the I Ching, which to him at least seemed to be the most simple and elegant form of conversing with the universe, reading time patterns or waves as he called them.
They returned in November to hunker down with Dennis in Colorado before the pair, after a few short months, both returned to Berkeley to finish their studies from 1972 through 1975. After graduating, Terrance would conclude his relationship with Evie, only to marry his longtime friend from Jerusalem, Kathleen Harrison, with whom he would have 2 children and spend 17 years together studying and founding various organizations dedicated to botanical study.
All about them botanist chicks.
From Jerusalem.
I mean, the first girl was an ethnobotanist. You know, he has a taste.
He's like, tell me the things.
Tell me the things.
In True Hallucinations, Terence McKenna says that he settled his legal trouble in the spring of '73 while he was staying in Colorado with Dennis prior to returning to Berkeley. Directly following this statement, he recounts a fascinating story with a chance run-in with a Nazi in a small island nation of Timor, where he had gotten stuck at a hotel for a while. Long story short, this German fellow named Dr. Heinz offered Terrance a bit of funding and some help penetrating the Amazon if he would only accompany him on a fact-finding expedition to seek more rare mineral deposits to mine and extract.
What?
So this dude worked with a Nazi?
He found a Nazi in 1973?
Yeah, I
and
mean,
worked with him?
No, this is back before the Amazon. He was trying to find a way to avoid detection for smuggling hashish, and he's just wandering around these East Asian countries and staying in hotels and running out of money and looking for weed.
You just stumble upon a Nazi.
Well, it's still 1971, and he meets this gregarious dude who, throughout his conversation, sort of reveals that his dad was in the SS. And Terrance is like, oh my God, this guy's a Nazi.
Right, but he ends up working with him anyways?
Well, the Nazi guy offered him a job, and Terrance reluctantly accepted it, but he never heard from Dr. Heinz again until a chance meeting at a Max Planck Institute lecture where he attended years later. So at this lecture, when Terrance went to say hello to Dr. Heinz, reminding him that they had met in Timor, Heinz replied that he had never met McKenna, and that furthermore, he had never even visited Kupang, a piece of information which indirectly confirmed that he had. Afterward, Heinz goes back to ignoring McKenna, and the story concludes just as nothing more than a funny yarn. One is left to question. Did Terrance meet some kind of Nazi spy? Why did this multi-page story appear after a surprisingly unsatisfying few lines regarding Terrance no longer being wanted by the FBI? Is there a connection? If we use the I Ching and TimeWave Zero charts, can we prove that Terrance is admitting he's a spy? We may never know. But what we do know is that once Terrance returned in '71, he had a few spores with him and began working out a way to grow them cheaply using household equipment. The idea was to introduce mycelial cultures to a rye-grain substrate. Kept in the proper conditions, it was possible to grow a lot of mushrooms. The brothers published their findings in 1976 under the name O.T. Oss and O.N. Oeric in a work called Psilocybin Magic Mushrooms Grower's Guide, which sold over 100,000 copies in 10 years. This effectively unleashed mushrooms upon the unsuspecting public, which over time began to appreciate Terence McKenna's thoughts about mushrooms more and more.
I'm real curious about one thing. Why is it important for you to do this?
I wonder myself. You mean, am I the alien ambassador, whether I like it or not? Well, I often, when asked this question, I've said, you know, it beats honest work. Certainly when I reached La Chorrera in 1971, I had a price on my head by the FBI. I was running out of money. I was at the end of my rope. And then they recruited me and said, you know, with a mouth like yours, there's a place for you in our organization. And, you know, I've worked in deep background positions about which the less said, the better. And then, you know, about 15 years ago, they shifted me into public relations, and I've been there to the present.
So, whatever you want to say about Terence McKenna, he gave us mushrooms.
He brought it to the public eye for sure.
So, Terence spent the better part of the 80s and 90s becoming a well-known lecturer on mushrooms, the psychedelic experience, DMT, and spiritual futurism, which earned him fame, success, and happiness until his untimely death at 53 from a brain tumor in the year 2000.
Oh, he had mushrooms growing on his brain.
He did talk to his doctor about it. They both wondered, like, did my years of doing drugs lead to this?
Yeah, you never know. Unfortunately, at least in my opinion, the TimeWave Zero theory petered out slowly in his last days, mostly due to lack of evidence. Equations, models, hard scientific explanations of how we could feasibly observe and predict the movement of time in higher dimensions. It just wasn't possible to test at that time or explain in plain terms. So it made more sense for him to stick to anecdotes and philosophical theories about why and what they did to the human psyche. Was tripping really a direct interfacing with an alien consciousness to form a symbiotic relationship with it on the psychic plane? Was this entity trying to help elevate human beings into a higher dimensional consciousness? Or perhaps it was just the brain falsely interpreting random static?
For most of his career, Terence McKenna was obsessed with the I Ching and used it as his data set for the rest of his work. But what is the I Ching?
So the I Ching uses 64 hexagrams, and it's called hexagrams because there's 6 lines, and the lines represent yin and yang. Yin are the broken lines, and yang are solid lines. Specifically, the sequence that Terence was interested in seems to be the King Wen sequence, which is actually the oldest sequence of I Ching. So to my knowledge, not all of the hexagrams go in the same sequence because it depends on the sequence. There's a bunch of different ones, but the King Wen is really popular and it's also the oldest known sequence.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Regarding the TimeWave Zero theory that he has, according to Wikipedia, when examining the King Wen sequence of 64 hexagrams, McKenna noticed a pattern. He analyzed the degree of difference between the hexagrams in each successive pair and claimed that he found a statistical anomaly, which he believed suggested that the King Wen sequence was intentionally constructed with the sequence of hexagrams ordered in a highly structured and artificial way, and that this pattern codified the nature of time's flow in the world. With the degrees of difference as numerical values, McKenna worked out a mathematical waveform based on the 384 lines of change that make up the 64 hexagrams. He was able to graph the data, and this is what became the novelty time wave. Have you guys seen this graph, TimeWave Zero graph?
As you can see here, as the line goes down, it touches the top of the pyramids, which also touches the top of Nazi oppression. And so, as you can see, the Egyptians are actually Nazis, obviously.
Yeah, that's the graph. So he eventually related this to the Mayan calendar and adopted the same official end date as the Mayan calendar. Personally, I feel as though he may have misinterpreted it as not having a cyclical nature. I think it's possible that he found something noteworthy, though, with the TimeWave Zero theory, but maybe instead of seeing it as a kind of algorithmic cycle like the Yugas or even the Tarot, he chose to view it as more of an apocalyptic end. So personally, I do agree with him on his perspective regarding novelty, where as novelty increases, complexity does as well. And I think this has to do also with remixes and history, like we were talking previously in an episode about remixes. The available material for remixing becomes more complex as more remixes become available for source material. I tried to figure out what Terence's mathematical formula was for converting the I Ching into a numerical graph. Like, I wanted to see the actual formulas to figure out how he got those numbers, but I couldn't find that information anywhere. The most that I could find was that he supposedly calculated these degrees of difference, but I just couldn't find his mathematical legwork for how he got there, how he did it. Interestingly, though, a university mathematician named Matthew Watkins conducted an in-depth study of the formula. I guess he got his hands on it, the formula that McKenna used for his TimeWave Zero graph. And this mathematician reported that there were numerous flaws with its construction. And I thought that was kind of funny. Like, maybe there is something there, but maybe he kind of messed it up and then also didn't think of it as cyclical. Like, maybe the end just starts over from the beginning of the graph again.
Maybe try eating some of my friends, the mushrooms, and then have a look at my graph.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like the apocalypse is not really an apocalypse. And just because the Mayan calendar ends, that's because they died out thousands of years ago. You know, the shamans only have enough time to make calendars for the future. You know, once they died out, you can't expect making calendars. So it's not really the end of the world. It's just like it's a mark of the shift or like a singularity point where everything kind of comes together, coalesces, and then explodes into randomness again.
Yeah, I really just think of it as a kind of algorithm that he discovered that maybe it is a repeating algorithm. It is kind of funny, but also kind of sad that he supposedly messed up some of the mathematical.
He was trying so hard, dude.
Yeah, I want someone to like fix it, you know? And then re-present it as like a cyclical thing. I would like to see that.
No one would help me because they all thought I was a mushroom munching hippie.
But yeah,
I think he did actually have help from one other person for all that mathematical funsies.
We didn't have the technology at the time, you understand?
So we had to get high.
We had to get blasted.
Take a heroic dose.
I understand, like, TimeWave Zero is a total flop. Totally agree. But he's on to some things. Like, he has some nomenclature and some observations and philosophical implications and arguments that make sense. For example, you know, you hear novelty. He talks about novelty a lot. Novelty is entropy or complexity, and we have that in physics, right? The more things there are, the more complex interactions you have, and the more complex and connected the universe becomes as it grows. He argued the faster time would accelerate. So you guys remember being a kid and 5 minutes seemed like a whole year?
Yeah.
You know, now that you're older and you're more aware of the many things and cycles carrying on around you, time seems to slip by faster and faster, like right through your fingers like sand.
Kind of makes me think of the periodic table.
Yeah. I mean, it gets more and more complex to where it's not even stable for a nanosecond or less.
That's what makes the UFOs fly.
Also, like, remember old school memes? Old school memes lasted years. Now they last for like 15 minutes. And he was trying to explain this with basic mathematics and anecdotal examples of how our world and the movement through the time is all holographic. Like it builds upon the previous iteration. It gets more and more detailed, and then it zooms faster and faster. The more variables and bigger the playing field, the faster things react and move. He speaks of an attractive force at the end of time, or the time wave, which is what he called it, where the pattern will reset and start again. So perhaps the apocalypse, it's like hitting the reset button and everything explodes out again and becomes completely random. He does relate it to the Mayan calendar, the cycles, technology growth, the paradigm shifts we experience, like the Industrial Revolution or the first book, the first printing press, or the internet, even financial cycles and how quantum waves collapse inside neurons in your own brain. All of these are governed by some kind of law of time that it slowly increases, gets faster and faster and faster and higher and higher and higher in amplitude, and then it collapses suddenly and then it starts again.
I think if Terence McKenna were alive today, he could probably argue that the TimeWave Zero moment struck when David Bowie died, because that's more or less what the memes say.
Yeah, the world went crazy after that. Like all this weird stuff started happening.
And now boys are girls, girls are boys.
It's another wave of novelty. And it's like, if you think about when that happened, like maybe in the late 1800s before the wars, like in the early 1900s, and then all this famine and war and like, you know, poverty happened, you know, capitalism rising up. You have these cycles that happen throughout history. You can like observe them. They will fluctuate, they will grow, get stable, and then they'll go up this hyperbolic curve and then suddenly collapse back down to the very bottom.
So the big unsatisfying non-conclusion was this idea that everything in our lives was leading like dominoes to this one existential moment at the end of time.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's not his invention, but it's the eschatomton, the apocalypse as it's also known, or as my favorite, the singularity, which all of our knowledge coalesces into one meaningful grain of understanding. But he described the attractive force in the future, in the time wave, as where novelty or complexity is so high and intense that it seems to pull other past timelines towards it. So it's an attractor in the future. This attractive force also shows up in other parallel theories of time or even biology. Rupert Sheldrake, one of my favorite scientists, explained morphic fields as an invisible attractive force in the present and related to the future, but it's a projection from the past and is shaped by the past. So say a tree is growing, right? How does the tree know where to put a branch? How does the rock know how to crumble when it's struck by a hammer? It's an organizational and linked to time and how physics plays out through time and what are the chances of this, the crack forming in that specific way. So it's an unfolding of space-time. It's a way that the future and the past can both reflect upon each other in a sort of echo or time wave that makes what happens now a reality.
That's how the construction science works in Death Stranding, but backwards.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of hard to think about, but I mean, if you think about it enough, like ripples on a pond or a tree branching out into multiple possibilities, I mean, it makes sense. I also talked about this a long time ago about the causal diamonds and, physics crap.
That was the most confusing thing we've ever discussed on the show, the causal diamonds. Let's be real.
It's really hard to explain, but the attractive force of the time wave can easily be illustrated by those little interactive toys that were in shopping malls or children's science museums when I was a kid. It's those large, wide funnels that are fed by either a marble or you'd put a quarter in, and your reward was watching the item slowly spiral around the rim and then accelerate faster and faster down into the center until it plunk went into the funnel. So Terrence was arguing that as time progresses, as things get more novel or complex, time actually appears to speed up and it gets faster and faster. And from this analogy, we get the shape of a spiral. So time could be a higher dimensional movement of our plane of reality that is spiraling, and it goes
inward, right?
Well, inward and outward.
Of course.
So as you get more novel, you come inward, like the funnel with the marble, and then you spin around, but you don't just fall into the abyss when the marble falls through, or the quarter does, but there's another funnel on the outside that propels it out of the other side, the opposite side. And then you get into a point of stability or less novelty. Not a lot's happening. Time moves a little bit slower.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of how Philip K. Dick believed that we were still essentially living in messianic times during the destruction of the Second Temple, and that all of reality was just being superimposed over that. So even though that sounds a bit wacky, it's possible that if TimeWave Zero were a thing, which it might be, the past is overlaid on the present because we're spiraling through it, and it has the same patterns to it.
Like how bell bottoms became popular again in the 2010s, but it took like 50 years for them to become cool again. There's cycles to everything. It's not just the sun or moon cycle. It's a cycle of slow to fast and from peak to point. This is a universal and holographic. You can look at any scale, anything, and measure, and you seem to see this spiraling and acceleration, and then it slows down and collapses again.
Like the stock market.
I mean, it applies from anything from a quantum particle to the cosmic and any other cycle we can observe in between those. But when it collapses, it's not the end of the universe. It's not the end of all we know. It doesn't just turn off like a television. The collapse of time is merely a cosmic giggle.
Something Terence McKenna pointed out has always stuck with me, and it's the idea that the universe is producing novelty when we're told that the second law of thermodynamics is essentially taking the universe and looking at it like a glow stick. You have complexity, you have the two chemicals on either side, and there's something that allows them to intermingle. The medium in the middle cracks, and both chemicals start to flow into each other, and there's an interaction. And the universe is like this interaction between all these chemicals. But eventually it burns out. The complexity wears itself out, and it's all just this inert nothingness. And yet still, even with the second law of thermodynamics, we see greater and greater and greater levels of complexity and not less. And that's always puzzled me, because the universe started very basic with just energy, and then it has slowly differentiated itself more and more and more and more until it's complex enough to have carbon-based life, which I agree with Terrence is pretty miraculous in and of itself.
Now, if you'd like to hear the rest of this episode where we talk about the path of the mushrooms, the birth of the horned moon goddess of nature, and the ties, of course, to ancient Egypt, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will get you not just the second half of this show, it will get you the second half of all of our shows, which more than doubles the content of The Whole Rabbit. I'll send you a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our cover art, which you could vandalize anything you want with, and I'll send you the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can discuss with us all the wrong ways to eat a Reese's. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Fire out, man.